is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I am Alex Tapscott here with Andrew Young. The so-called Trump pump has begun. In the time since the failed assassination attempt on the former president, Bitcoin has moved up 12%, while Ethereum has climbed 10%. Solana has fared even better, up 15%. And in the public markets, companies like Coinbase and some of the miners have done even better. So what is going on here? Well, I think that a lot of investors are piling into crypto because they believe a Trump administration is more likely to embrace policies that are friendly to the industry. And I think the thinking is, now that there's been this assassination attempt, he's going to get maybe a sympathy bump in the polls and it's all going to help him out. And he was already starting from a position of strength. We're going to debate that on the show today because I think Andrew and I have slightly different points of view on this. Obviously, there's a lot that government can do to accelerate innovation, and whoever's in charge does matter. Though generally speaking, who's the president at any point in time has had little bearing on things like, say, the stock market. Democrats, Republicans, markets can do well or poorly in both kinds of environments. And I'm frankly not convinced that Trump administration is going to be the cure-all that a lot of people think it will be. And I actually think there could be a lot of politics aside and your views on all other issues. When it comes to crypto alone, I actually think there could be some negatives that could come about from this. But I want to keep my powder dry. And Andrew, just what's your initial take on this big market move we've seen?
Yeah, it's been crazy. So since since the assassination attempt on Trump, his odds to become president have gone up about 12%. So they've gone, Polymarket, Betfair, all the different sort of Predict It, which is like the US based one.
Yeah.
It's roughly gone from like a 58% probability to high 60s. And Trump has also come out even more in support of crypto. And then most importantly, he also nominated JD Vance as his VP. And JD Vance is like some people call him like the Republican Elizabeth Warren, because he's got some very sort of, some would say progressive, almost like left-wing views on certain aspects of the economy, particularly around like organized labor and things like that, labor rights. But then at the same time, he's also seen as incredibly pro-technology because he used to be a VC, and there's also his main backers are actually Peter Thiel, who's obviously one of the sort of legendary VCs in Silicon Valley. And then on top of that, JD Vance, he also runs like a $200 million Ohio-based VC fund, I think still. And then finally, there's
I'm not sure he run it though. He's a sitting senator, right?
Yeah. So, but he actually he raised the fund only 4 years ago, like it was 2020. Yeah. So either way, he's probably maybe not as involved anymore, but that's, 4 years is not very long. And then finally, there's tons of videos of him essentially talking and opining at a very like technical level on crypto and like the difference between meme coins and utility coins. He talks a lot about how the SEC, he thinks the SEC is doing the wrong thing. They're sort of allowing meme coins and things that don't have any value to proliferate while attacking, actual real businesses and real products. He thinks it should be reversed. He thinks,
I saw the clip.
SEC should be attacking, meme coins, not like actual real businesses. And then I think he also helped write some crypto legislation that hit the floor a couple months ago. So, and we can also talk about the Ethereum ETF too. I don't want to spoil everything, but I think that's like a really, having a VP that's that fluent as well in crypto and clearly pro technology, at least his backers are, and he used to be in the technology field. I think that's a very good sign that, Trump's rhetoric on crypto maybe wasn't just, pure vote getting. I'm curious what you think as well. I know you sort of were taking the contra opinion on this prior to jumping on this.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're not a politics show, but I do think that people have become overly bullish on this. There's this view that, a Trump presidency is going to clear the deck for all sorts of, like, a big wish list of things that the industry has wanted but hasn't gotten, because it views that there's some sort of like political inertia or hostility even from the current administration. And I just I feel like people have amnesia. Like, does anyone remember that this guy was already the president? And, at the time, it's worth pointing out that he said he didn't like Bitcoin because he thought that it could make the US dollar weak, and there's nothing he hates more than weakness. And, in general, he took a very hostile position on it. Obviously, things have changed in terms of some of these stated policies. The Republican convention, the platform has crypto in it. He's taking donations. He's going to speak at this conference. He's gladly accepting cash from super PACs backed by crypto VCs and other, important figures. So, I get all that. But, the guy is mercurial. He changes his mind very quickly. He's someone who listens often to, the last person who had his ear. He also has deep-seated beliefs that I think he keeps some of them closely guarded. And I think if it's politically expedient for him to take a position on an issue in an election, he'll do that. But when he's governing, if you want to call it that, it could be very different, right? It may not be politically expedient to do this. And it may not matter that his VP is a so-called venture capitalist who is pro crypto, because it's kind of his way or the highway. That's sort of his method of leadership. And I'm not totally sure that he'll feel comfortable delegating anything to his VP. The flip side, of course, is that he does decide, this is too arcane. It's really not worth my time. I'm not really interested in this actually, so I'm going to delegate it to Vance. In which case, maybe Vance becomes the champion that people in the industry are looking for leadership on a lot of these issues. But I just want to remind everyone, we've kind of been through this before, and you may recall too that the climate, the economy was pretty good during the Trump years, but it wasn't necessarily because of Trump per se, right? And I think that the policies towards business are sometimes incoherent. He always has a kind of a pro-business point of view. Obviously, tax cuts are things that are really good for businesses in the sense that you keep, more money falls to the bottom line. But a lot of thoughtful people who look at the stuff more closely than I do, including a lot of right-wing think tanks, have argued that if you look at it on the whole, his tariff plan, his plan to deport millions of people, the fact that if you cut taxes as much as he's planning, there's probably going to be massive deficit spending, could actually make inflation way worse and could throttle a lot of businesses who rely on free trade for growth. And one of those businesses today happens to be chip makers, right? And I just think it's worth keeping the crypto conversation in the context of his broader views towards business and towards policy. And even if you look at what happened today on the chip side of things, he said that basically that the U.S. is paying insurance or is protecting Taiwan from Chinese intervention attack, and they're getting nothing in return. And by the way, that country's stolen all the chip making capacity. I think that's a pretty limited sort of point of view of how to think about those kinds of issues. But those chip stocks were down 7% today, right? Including the big champions like NVIDIA. So I just think it's just not clear to me that this is something that's going to be an unalloyed positive for free market capitalism that I think a lot of people in crypto espouse. And I think that when it comes to the specific crypto policies, he's not bound by any of it. And if it's no longer helpful, I don't see him dying on the hill of crypto. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's funny because I totally agree. I mean, everyone sort of sees Trump as pro-business, but he's also, incredibly pro-tariffs. And then JD Vance is, somewhat of a populist in some ways. At least that's what people are sort of describing him. And I sort of realized that I think there's kind of a bifurcation between Trump and in terms of which businesses he sees as good and which ones he sees as bad. So I think Trump doesn't really care about technology companies that much, um, because there's not that many workers there, right? And like he's already losing 90+% of those workers are already voting Democrat. So I think like in some ways it's not really his like core constituency that he plays to. Whereas like big industrial size, kind of old economy companies are more sort of in his crosshairs. I think partly because he also understands it, and then also just because like that's his entire voter base. And so like I think a funny thing I realized is that Trump, I think, is actually very pro technology, like chips aside, obviously, but very pro technology and crypto, and sort of less sort of pro on these like old style economy stocks. And so it's kind of a funny divergence where within like the technology and crypto circles, everyone sees him as incredibly pro business. Like he's getting tons and tons of VC money, whereas everyone sees Biden as kind of the exact opposite. And which is kind of obvious also just because, the Democrats have been sort of using big tech as a punching bag. And Elizabeth Warren, like literally has a campaign poster called "I'm building an anti-crypto army." Yeah. So I think moral of the story is it's all over the place, but it's something that I've sort of realized is that the Republicans are more pro tech than the Democrats, which is kind of a stunning shift from even 10 years ago.
It is interesting. I mean, I think that like you're right that it's all over the place, and I think it's important to sort of define what we mean by this. So when it comes to big tech, I think both parties are lukewarm to hostile towards big tech. It may be that's the founders of some big tech companies. Like, I don't know if you count like a Reid Hoffman, who's this, former founder of LinkedIn, for example, as part of big tech when he sold the link to Microsoft many years ago. But he's a big donor to the Democrats. And I think they probably get a lot of money from, founders from the sort of old guard of like technology companies. On the flip side, I think that they feel that big tech platforms are ways, amplify disinformation and, radical whatever ideas that they think are undemocratic or something. On the right, they feel basically the same way, right? They view like these platforms as tilting the scale against, right-wing voices and, shadow banning and muting and deplatforming and all that stuff. And, helping to amplify the other side. I don't know that either of those sides are correct, but they both, as a result, kind of are very suspicious and almost hostile towards big tech in the sense of like data aggregators, social media companies, companies that have a lot of influence in our lives. I don't know. I think that's a fair statement. And then when it comes to this new kind of emerging little tech and the VC world, yes, I agree with you, at least as far as I can tell. And maybe it's just a lot of outsized voices. The little tech VC world is clearly shifting towards the Republican point of view on this. And I think that Republicans are actively courting those groups as well. And maybe again, it's all over the place, but maybe the populist streak of, the new Republican Party will be more pro entrepreneurship and less and more suspicious of big business, right? Like, I think it's important to distinguish between being pro-business and be like pro-capitalism or pro-entrepreneurship, because what I think a lot of people in the Valley would like to see is certain industries where there are a lot of vested interests, where there's been regulatory capture, where companies have like monopoly pricing power and so forth. They'd like to see those kinds of companies see greater competition, areas like healthcare or education or financial services, heavily regulated industries. They'd love to see more opportunities to innovate. And I'm obviously like very sympathetic to that point of view, but I think that they're putting a lot of faith in a guy who I just think doesn't care. Maybe there are people behind him and around him who are enablers and advisors who are very thoughtful and knowledgeable about these areas. Regardless of your view on that, they may have a real point of view. Like, I'm not sure he does. I don't think he has a point of view on crypto. I just think he's like, these guys are giving me a lot of money right now. I'm happy to take it. while it's happening, I could speak in an event and it'll be big news and I'll see a lot more donations, sure. So I don't know. I'm just not sold.
Yeah, I think for us in crypto, like that's better than active hostility. So I think like people in crypto will take that.
Yeah, I
But
suppose that's true. That's how a lot of people do think. Yeah.
yeah, I think. Sorry, I know we don't have too much time. I want to cover the Ethereum ETF is supposed to come out next Tuesday to
Yeah.
officially start trading. We should get some of the ETF bros back on from Bloomberg.
Yeah. Well, we
But
got to get Safeguard back on.
yeah, exactly. Any thoughts on the launch? Like, do you think it's going to be a success? Like, there's sort of three camps. There's one camp is sort of the default consensus opinion. If I was to rate it, I would say is maybe like 70% of people, 70% of the takes I see is that it's going to be like a sort of like a mild to moderate success. It's going to drive some flows, but nowhere near the amount of flows that Bitcoin drove, Bitcoin ETF drove.
Yeah.
There's maybe 25% people who think it's going to drive like similar levels of flow. It's going to be a huge success. Ethereum is going to go to like $8,000 right away. And then there's like a small minority who just think it's going to be useless, maybe because like there's no staking or they just, I don't know, they're Bitcoin maxis. What's your take on the Ethereum launch?
Well, I'm surprised that there isn't a fourth take, which is that because the Ethereum Grayscale ETF trust is converting to an ETF, there's also the prospect of mass redemptions out of that fund. And the question that I think is pertinent is, what will the net inflows be? Like what kind of gross flows are we going to see coming into this? And how will they compare to any outflows from the Ethereum ETF? I personally think that the first few days, maybe even a week or two, could be kind of choppy in the sense that, we might see days where there's big inflows, and maybe a couple of days where there are outflows. And the price might go up and the price might go down. And it won't be clear for a week or so what the real long-term impact is going to be. Do you know what that reminds me of? The launch of the Bitcoin ETFs, right? Like the price pumped on Bitcoin to like $45,000 into the launch. And then post-launch, we started seeing money coming out of the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. And everyone was like, oh no, like, is there going to be demand? How sustainable it is? That, like, are these boomer ETF buyers, as they're called, are they going to keep buying into, weakness? Or are they going to get scared and is this all going to fall apart? So I just think, like, let's just be patient post-launch. I think the first few days could be a bit choppy. If the price goes down a few points, don't be surprised. But like, this is a classic mid-wit sort of bell curve, right? Where it's like, yeah, we can do all these hot takes and everything, but like, obviously an ETF for Ethereum is very good for Ethereum and long-term the price of Ether. Like, there's no other way around that. So in a month, are we higher than or lower than where we are the day before the launch? Like, barring any obviously black swan events, I'm pretty confident in that. I think so. And I think that from there we go higher. And let's just talk briefly about Bitcoin flows, right? We've been seeing the German government of Saxony selling Bitcoin. They basically like bottom ticked this market last week. And a lot of those flows have seemingly been going into these ETFs. Now, it's not like the ETF's like, there's an opportunity to scoop up a bunch of Bitcoin on the cheap here. But it is interesting that the interest in Bitcoin has been sustained during that period where the price has been under pressure. And like every day, there's another massive number. There was like a $600 million number. It was one of the biggest numbers in 2 months for flows into the ETF. I bet, as a single fund, the BlackRock Bitcoin ETF, holds more assets than the biggest and most popular like silver ETFs, right, which have been around forever, and has had probably the most successful launch of any ETF in history, and accounts for a big chunk of BlackRock's ETF asset growth. And like we've seen it before in the United States context. The final thing I'll add is just the Canadian context, which we have and we've talked about before in the past. We did have a Bitcoin ETF launch in Canada in 2021. And others that followed it. And we did have Ethereum ETFs, which came out shortly after that. The Ethereum ETFs, I think, were like a quarter, maybe a fifth of the assets. Okay. So not the same. I think anybody who thinks that the Ethereum ETF is going to gather as much money as Bitcoin are delusional, right? Bitcoin is the biggest meme. It's got the best narrative for the average investor, digital gold for the digital economy, Larry Fink pumping it, store of value, all that stuff. But, the demand for ETH and for ETH ETFs is going to be real. Like, it will be significant. And by the way, like, there have been 20 plus $billion US of flows into Bitcoin. So a quarter of that is like $5 billion. $5 billion of demand for an asset where a big chunk of it is staked, where wallet balances are really low, where holders have been holding for on average longer than normal. Like, these are all metrics that you can check on Glassnode and elsewhere. And then you see that kind of demand coming in, it's going to have an enormous amount of pressure on the price.
I love it. Yeah, I think that sounds great to me. I'm just waiting for Larry Fink to come on and start promoting Ethereum the way that Jensen Yang, the founder of NVIDIA, was writing about Ethereum. He wrote some very bullish things on Ethereum a couple of years back, partly because
his GPUs were being used.
Were being used to mining.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think that's great. I mean, yeah, I think it feels like everything is. It almost feels too perfect right now. The setup, like, it's like crypto's had a pause. There's been a couple of months since it was going up in a straight line in February. We have like what looks like incredibly favorable regulatory developments, both in terms of the ETF as well as just the Trump chances of winning are 70%, and he's extremely pro crypto. We're getting very close to the first rate cut. We're a couple of months away now at this point. I think I haven't checked, but it's like a very incredibly high probability that September there's a rate cut, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's the swap market's pricing in like almost 100% by September.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we talked about this like 8 months ago. The three main catalysts are ETF, rate cut, and the halvening. Halvening's happened, ETFs happened, rate cut is about to come, and then on top of that, obviously more ETF. We didn't factor in a massive softening in sort of regulatory pressure as well. So, yeah, it just seems like everything's aligned. One space that's also kind of interesting I want to sort of touch on is I saw Grayscale is launching a decentralized AI fund, which is going to be investing in, I believe 6 assets. Most of it is in Filecoin, Near protocol, which is like an L1 chain. We've had guys on to talk about that, as well as Render, which we've also had the founder of Render on. Actually, we've had the founders of all, or not founders, but team members from all 3 of those projects on, as well as a couple other smaller coins like BitTensor, for example. So yeah, I mean, like, what do you think about that? I mean, like, NVIDIA has been going up in a straight line up until this week. Do you think decentralized AI is finally have its moment in the sun? And do you think this like fund could sort of help pave the way a little bit?
Well, I think we're going to have to save that conversation for another episode, because I don't pretend to be the world's leading authority on decentralized AI, though I do pretend to be an authority on a lot of other things where I might not be qualified to do so. No, I'm joking. But on the AI thing, I think it's a very smart move by Grayscale. I think that a lot of their funds are single asset trusts, and they've been earning, higher than average fees on those trusts for a very long time. But, the writing's on the wall in the sense that there will be more regulatory clarity, there will be more choice, and there will be other ways to get exposure to Solana on its own, for example, if you want it in a listed wrapper. So they're innovating, and I think this is an innovative strategy, right? I think it's true that these protocols and these assets are mature enough that they can be owned in a product like this. It's a smart sort of thematic idea. The idea of, we should be decentralizing parts of the AI stack, decentralizing training, decentralizing data. We should be maybe even decentralizing governance of some of these systems. And so I think that it's very much like in line with where the zeitgeist is. And I hope it does really well, and I wish them well, because stuff like this helps to sort of push the ball forward. In terms of like, where are we with decentralized AI as a general like field of study and practice, we should bring on an expert. I think it's a terrific topic, and I think it would be an amazing episode of the show, to be honest.
Perfect. Well, that's what we'll do.
All right, well, let's do it. Okay, man. Well, that's it for today. A little quick chat between you and me. I always enjoy these conversations. We'll be back with guests, I think, in the next couple of weeks here. And until then, follow us on Twitter, give the show a like and a follow on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast. And we will see you next week. That's it for DeFi Decoded. Take care.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.